don't ever expect anyone to air out their dirty laundry to the extent that I do, right? Like, I don't even expect you to do that. Never have. But when we start a co-parenting podcast, I do expect us to be able to talk about the scenarios in a way that we're all comfortable, but that we are being transparent about the struggles, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the nitty-gritty details down to like the minute little, things that have occurred, but we should be able to say, okay, Vee and I just recently went through a huge struggle with co-parenting. Here's the gist of it, and here's how we worked through it. That is the level that I would have been comfortable with, but that wasn't even being done. It was very much like, I can't speak on Joe. I can't speak on his behalf. I can't speak for him. There was no speaking about it, but I was expected to give baby mamas my pregnancies, my relationship. There was a conversation that occurred behind my back about not why I wasn't giving that to baby mamas. And I had said, if I was going to give it to any show other than Barely Famous, it would be Coffee Combos.
So damn, Vee was calling Kail out for not being honest and forthcoming about her pregnancies as well.
Because that is the mothership of all of these podcasts.
I also think that it probably could have been remedied had Joe been brought in to the mix. If that was the issue, then Joe needs to be there to speak for himself. Because if you're putting yourself in a situation and agreeing that we are going to talk about co-parenting, but you don't feel comfortable to talk about co-parenting without your partner, which I can understand because it could get sticky, then let him be there to talk for himself.
I mean, that's an idea. That was not something that we ever discussed that I remember. I mean, Chris.
And I do find that to be interesting that they never thought to have Joe on the show to discuss his point of view, because at the beginning, when they first launched this, he certainly was their first guest, and he's done solo episodes with Vee as well. So why wouldn't they, in a moment like this, go, hey, why don't we bring him around and see what he has to say about this? But perhaps things were just so ugly between he and Kail that they couldn't even be in the same room. I don't know.
Do we ever talk about having Joe come on? Maybe one time we talked about bringing him on to potentially have him speak up, and she was not with it. I think there was one time that I'm like vaguely remembering. And I just kept saying to her, why are you not speaking for yourself? I'm not asking you to speak for Joe, but it's because she doesn't have a voice in our co-parenting. Whatever discussions they're having, she's not part of the ones that I've asked her to be a part of it. I've asked Joe, there was a point where I reached out to Joe and I said, Vee needs to be involved. Like, Vee's not showing up to anything that for Isaac. I mean, this was a long time ago. She's not coming to games. I think she went to a handful of games, maybe after I said something, because I was like, what is going on? Like, people have this like false perception of her level of involvement. And that's a problem. Like, if that's the case, then say that on the fucking podcast.
So there you go. The deadbeat allegations. My jaw was on the floor when I heard this. Kail was having private conversations with Joe saying, listen, your wife or your girlfriend, whatever she was at the time, she's not stepping up as a stepmom for Isaac. She's not coming to any of his games, any of his like milestones, things like that. Like, wow. Kail does say that it was a long time ago, but I think at this point, if I'm being truly honest with you, first of all, if that is true, that Vee was never showing up to these major moments, listen, I'm not a stepmom. So if any of you guys are stepmoms, or if you have kids and they have stepmoms, let me know how you would feel about that. But I personally think that it would be, I imagine that maybe Vee potentially felt like she didn't want to step over Kail's toes by being at everything as well. And so she wanted to pick and choose and then allow Isaac some time to just have his biological parents there. I don't know. But if she wasn't going just because she wasn't really interested in these things, then I do find that to be kind of like a little bit like sucky. But at the same time, I imagine that in her head, she's like, listen, perhaps I'm not going, but this is something like where both of his, parents will be at. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of curious how you guys feel about it. I'm kind of 50-50. I do feel like if you're going to live with the kid and and she has been there his entire life, you guys, since he was months old. So I do find that really odd that she wasn't going to these things. But at the same time, I feel like Kail feels backed into a corner because the disillusion of Baby Mama's No Drama is not going the way that she thought it would be going. She's catching a lot of heat, especially after that very abrasive final episode that she taped, compared to how teary and sad and, devastated Vee seemed. Like, the juxtaposition was just so extreme, and she caught a lot of heat for it in the comment section. And now, as she replaces Baby Mama's No Drama with that new podcast that she runs with Becky, the comment section are still saying, a lot of things against her. And so now she is trying to get us to hate Vee. and she is throwing everything she can about Vee out there to see what sticks and to see what gets us to hate Vee, you know? And I don't know, I find that to be rather toxic, if I could be honest with you. And you're going to see more instances of that, or you're going to hear more instances of that later on in the pod. But, and so it begins.
On the podcast, you know what, Kail? Here's why I can't have these conversations. I thought it was a good idea. I thought that this was going to be the premise of the show, but come on the podcast and say it. So, because you're allowing me to be villainized for something that you set up.
I really also don't understand what would be the problem in having a conversation if she's not attending Isaac's games or whatever it was many moons ago, not even relevant anymore, but
Correct.
for the sake of the story.
Right, sake of the story. Thank you.
Do you guys think it's for the sake of the story? If it was so long ago and it was fixed, and if it was so long ago that it was even before they, launched this podcast, is it relevant, or are we just trying to lead a witch hunt? I'm asking for a friend.
If that was the case, you would have never felt comfortable going on a baby mama's recording and addressing that and going to her and saying, hey, like, I have this issue and I would really like to talk to you about it. And I think it would be very helpful for people who are listening, also dealing with co-parenting. This is how I feel about it. How can we work through this? That was never an option. Or you didn't feel comfortable enough to do that?
No, I tried. In my opinion, I feel like there were several instances where I tried to bring things up and she shut it down.